everyone. This video is just going to be a quick review of everything we've done so far to get you ready for the quiz tomorrow on what we've covered so far in this chapter. So the first thing we're going to do is quickly review the four types of inequalities. So less thans we know look like this. An example would be x is less than 2. And the big thing to remember here is then when we're graphing these inequalities, we use an open circle and we'll shade to the left. So I'm going to make a note here. This is our open circle. Our next one is greater than. And so we use the same number. Example is x is greater than 2. In this case, put it here, we're still going to use an open circle, but we're going to shade to the right. And actually, I'll add that here. Open circle and shade right. For our less than, we said open circle and we shade left. Now, obviously, this all is dependent on that x being written first. So for x less than or equal to, we could have x less than or equal to 2. What's going to change here is now we'll have a closed circle and shade to the left. And last but not least is our greater than or equal to. So greater than x greater than or equal to 2. Now we're going to have a closed circle on 2, but we're going to shade this time to the right. So closed circle, and we'll shade right. So that's the first thing we learned, was just how to graph basic inequalities. The next thing we learned was for solving. And I'm going to make a note here. Here we use the same steps as solving equations. But there's one big reminder. So I'm going to put that in all caps here. Our reminder is that if you divide or multiply by a negative number, you must flip the inequality symbol. So that's the big thing we have to remember when we're solving inequalities. So let's go ahead and do a couple of examples here. So for number 1, we're going to solve and then graph, just like we've been practicing. So I'm going to draw my line through my inequality symbol. Now I notice that I have parentheses on both sides, so the first thing I need to do is distribute to get rid of those parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. When I do that on the left, I get 2x minus 12. Remember, I have to multiply that 2 by both terms on the inside. I know that's less than or equal to, I'm going to go ahead and distribute. So I've got 3x minus 12, and then I'm going to bring down the plus 7. Now, my left side is looking okay, but I notice on my right side, I actually have a pair of like terms here. So I'm going to deal with those before we go on. So I'm going to simplify this side. This is going to be 3x. If I do negative 12 plus 7, I'm going to get a negative 5. So now I've got 2x minus 12 is less than or equal to 3x minus 5. So now there's a couple ways we could deal with this. I have variables on both sides of the equation. You may do a different way than me, which is fine. What I like to do is I like to move all my variables over to the left side. So I'm going to start by subtracting 3x. Now when I do 2 minus 3, I get a negative 1x. I'm going to bring down my minus 12. Since I just subtracted, I haven't divided by a negative. I keep my inequality symbol the same. These are going to cancel, and I'm going to bring down my negative 5. Now I'm going to add 12 to both sides. My line kind of ran out here. So I get a negative x is less than or equal to, let's see, that's a positive 7. Last thing I need to do is divide by a negative 1, and that's going to cause my inequality symbol to flip. So now I have x is greater than or equal to negative 7. I'm going to draw a closed circle at negative 7, and I'm going to shade to the right. All right, number 2, now by comparison, is a much easier problem. I see I only have one set of parentheses, so I'm going to go ahead and distribute. So I get negative 2x minus 2 is less than 8. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So I get a negative 2x is less than 10. Last thing I'm going to do is divide by that negative 2, and since I'm dividing by a negative 2, again, I'm going to have to flip my inequality symbol. So I have x is greater than a negative 5, which means an open circle at negative 5, and shade right. So those are our kind of simple inequalities. The next thing we worked with in this chapter, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. We have to remember those special types of answers we had, the no solution and all real numbers. So no solution is going to look like this. Let's say I had 3 times x minus 2 is less than 3x plus 4. So if I were going to try and solve this, I would distribute first, and I would get 3x minus 6 is less than 3x plus 4. Now, I want to move my variables over, so I'm going to subtract 3x on both sides. Oh shoot, you know what? I'm going to make this a positive. Sorry, I have to back up here. So 3 times x plus 2, which makes this 3x plus 6. Sorry about that. So now I'm going to subtract my 3x's. Those cancel, and I get 6 is less than 4. Since I know this is false, 6 is not less than 4, we would say our answer is no solution. And remember, you have to write those words to show me you know what that means. Now, on the other hand, we could have something that looks like this, and here's where I'll use the original example. So, as always, my first step is to distribute. So I have 3x minus 6 is less than 3x plus 4. Again, I want to move my x's, so I'm going to subtract. Oh my goodness, let's see. Sorry, let's do this. Oh yeah, no, this is okay. Subtract 3x on both sides. And now I have negative 6 is less than a positive 4. I know that negative 6 is less than 4. That's a true statement. So in this case, my final answer would be all real numbers. All right, now the last piece of the chapter was on, oh my gosh, I hope you've been able to hear me this whole time. The last part of the chapter was on compound inequalities. Now, I didn't really call them this less sandwiches. We did use the idea of sandwiches for our ands. And then we had our or inequalities. Remember, ands were where the x was sandwiched, or whatever variable was sandwiched in between two values. So for example, -2 less than x is less than 5. And an or was two inequalities literally joined together with the word or. So maybe x is less than -2 or x is greater than 5. And so then we learned to solve and graph those inequalities as well. So let's see here. Remember when we had our and, I can tell it's and because the variable is in between those two values. We just drew two lines. Now, in the middle, before I do anything, I realize I have to distribute this. So I'm going to simplify the middle first. And I'm going to get a -2x minus 2. And so for right now, my values on the outside are going to stay the same. I haven't done anything to them yet. So now I can start working on getting x all by itself. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, or actually to both the middle and the outsides. So -4 plus 2 gives me a -2. I have less than. In the middle now, I have a -2x. And on the outside here, I have 6 plus 2, which is 8. Now to get x by itself, I'm going to divide by a -2. When I do that, I have a +1. Because I divided by a negative, all right, I need to flip the inequality. So now instead of a less than here, I have a greater than. X in the middle. I'm going to flip this and it becomes -4. Now I just want to rewrite it so my smaller number's on the left. So I'm going to have -4. This changes to a less than or equal to. My x is in the middle. This changes to a less than, and I have a +1. So when I go to graph it, I'm going to have a closed circle on -4, an open circle on 1, and shade everywhere in between. All right, the last problem for today is just solving one of my OR inequalities. And again, that's just like solving two separate inequalities. So I'm going to start with this 3x minus 1 is greater than 4. I'm going to add 1 on both sides. So I get 3x is greater than, let's change this to 5 so it works out nice. So 3x is greater than 6. If I divide by 3, I have x is greater than 2. Now I can solve this one. So I'm going to subtract 3. I get -2x is greater than 4. Now I'm going to divide by a -2, and when I do that, I'm going to have to flip my inequality. So my solution is x is greater than 2 or x is less than -2, and I'm going to graph those two inequalities. So that's going to go to the left. I'll have x is greater than 2 and shade to the right. All right, so that should give you a good start on preparing for the quiz. You'll have a review to work on as well that'll get you ready.